Take it away,
All
Jennifer.
right, great. Okay, so everybody, first thing is this presentation is meant for everybody and anybody. So at certain points, I will certainly not be speaking directly to you in your individual situation. Please bear with me. I hope by the end, everybody will feel like they've gotten something. The second thing is it's also a bit of a formal presentation, so I apologize for my stack of notes, but it's how I have to do it. So, all right, so let's go. So this presentation is about yards and gardens, focusing on biodiversity and water quality. And I'm curious to know how many of you consider yourselves to be fairly new, not just at gardening, but gardening for the health of the environment in general. Oh, wow, okay, great. And how many of you consider yourselves pretty into this for a while now? Okay, all right, that's great. So just a little bit about me. I've been mostly a volunteer with Myra for just a little over a year. I joined the education team with Natalia and been working with Kenna as well, both in general and on this presentation specifically. For a long time, my main interest has been the intersection of landscape design and environmental policy. I worked in those areas before kids. Since having kids, I've focused a lot more on plants and gardens specifically, but I have been an at-home mom. And so I was very eager to help put this presentation together to be a resource for watershed communities. And again, I really thank Natalia and Kenna for welcoming me to take the lead and for staying involved. Okay, so. Oh, this one? Mine likes slid down. Okay, so we'll be looking at a lot of ways someone can improve their yard or garden. I'll start off with a general introduction and some background before exploring some project ideas and some tools and approaches that maybe can help you. This one? Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's a little preview of the framework I'll be offering you all at the end. It invites you to choose a tier of commitment that we're calling protector, provider, or nurturer. The framework can guide your progress in whatever tier matches your interest. And we're not going to go into any of the details now. Later, on the other end of the intro and some of the body, we'll do that. So let's get started. So, classic New England. This is an image of New England nature that might resonate with folks. But we all know that nature is really everywhere, not just in these preserved areas. For each of us, nature can and often does start in our own yards. Most of nature is outside of the big protected areas. In our largely fragmented landscape, organisms and populations need stepping stones and pathways to find enough habitat. So these are our goals for healthy landscape and watershed. We want healthy waterways, we want stable food webs among organisms, and successful life cycles so that the animals can continue to reproduce and stay in our world. And the things we can do to achieve these things are reduce or eliminate yard chemicals, reduce soil erosion and runoff, favor native plants, keep some dry yard debris for habitat, and manage invasives. And we can call these practices keys to landscape health. And the plants we add are at the heart of our improvements. Plants, especially natives, are key to water quality and biodiversity. They bring other important benefits we won't be talking about much today. I'm going to mention them just quickly because they're important. Cooling, flood control, soil health, air quality, carbon sequestration, and good food. As everybody I know appreciates here. But in these slides, we're going to stick close to the topics of water quality and biodiversity, just because time. So now we'll look at some of the ways that native plants can be keys to landscape health. So a lot of you probably know what's going on here. A waterway covered with algae, not healthy. One key to landscape health is keeping fertilizer and other chemicals out of water bodies. Does anyone here volunteer with Myra's water quality monitoring? Anybody? Does anyone know about the water quality monitoring program? Okay, cool.
I used to do water, nice.
Oh, somebody said yes?
I used to,
Oh,
many years ago.
awesome. So you know a little about this story. So just very briefly, the algal growth is a sign of excess nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, mostly phosphorus. It'll lead to low oxygen and it'll suffocate aquatic life. So we want to prevent this if we can. So 2 ways to do that. One is to reduce or eliminate applications of those chemicals. Some of the nitrogen and phosphorus comes from, we talk about leaves that are natural and can make their way. But it's a lot of it is fertilizer runoff from yards, from lawns, sometimes pet waste. But we're gonna really focus on the yard landscape fertilizer source. So eliminating or reducing that is one way to prevent those algal blooms. But another way is there's going to be nitrogen in the landscape from the pet waste, from the leaves, sometimes you might want to use fertilizer. You can keep it from reaching the waterways by intercepting and absorbing it. And that can be done by plants. So we'll talk later about reducing the chemical use, but right now, let's look at intercept and absorb. So plants are really great at that. Plants in the path of runoff can capture and use nutrients and filter out chemicals. Turf grass does this a little bit, but not great. The soil is usually pretty compacted, which means it can't absorb very well. The roots are not very deep. The red circle, that's the turf grass. And compare that root system to the root system of these other plants that are natives. And a lot of those are native prairie plants. I'm not saying all native plants have this characteristic, but the kinds that would grow in the types of environments where lawns thrive will have a much better capacity for keeping soil healthy, for intercepting and absorbing excess nutrients than the turf grass would. And as you can imagine, hard packed or paved surfaces don't intercept and absorb at all. They just let that runoff keep on moving toward the waterways. So among plants, native perennials with deep roots are especially well equipped for this work. Deep-rooted native plants also manage rainless spells better because they have access to more soil moisture. So you don't have to keep watering and wetting that lawn surface or the ground surface. They can find their own moisture. So here's a peek at some of our native wild habitats made up of well-adapted native plants. Habitats range from shaded to sunlit, wet to dry, cool to sun-baked. Most plants are adapted to the acidic soil that's dominant in our region. Lots of plants to choose from, lots of different conditions and environments that they can thrive in. But our native plants are under stress in the wild. There was a survey done 25 years ago by Mass Wildlife's Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program. So in 1999, 25 years ago, 15% of the species surveyed were already in some danger. So you can imagine all of the development and all the disruption that's happened over the last 25 years. So we have a lot of plants that don't have great prospects in their own native habitats right now. But we have a huge opportunity to use the land around our homes to give these plants space and protection that they don't really have in wild spaces. Native plants are also central to a web of biodiversity. Rich habitats are full of interdependencies supporting complex webs of life, and even underground in the root zone of the soil. Really, mostly really tiny things. Even if you started digging, you wouldn't see a lot of the activity that's going on down there. Is anybody here active in Myra's invasive plant management activities? Yay! Okay, so an important key to protecting plant habitats is controlling invasive plants. Wild spaces that have escaped development are easily colonized by invasive plants that escape from our yards. Burning bush is a big culprit, and also barberry. There's going to be a handout that talks about others and native plants that can be good substitutes for them. Let's see. And when wild areas are colonized by invasive plants, they're no longer healthy and diverse habitats. And they displace the natives. So habitat loss along with chemical pollution brings animal diversity loss. And we're seeing a startling decline in wildlife populations all over the world right now. This is the darkest slide. This is not a doom and gloom presentation, but this is sort of a core. And we're going to get to gardens right after this slide. So these scary numbers show downward trends for wildlife populations globally in all different groups and subgroups of animals. And it shows how much some of our planet's animals are thought to be at risk by very credible organizations, assessments. So every one of these groups and subgroups is in decline. And the United Nations predicts that worldwide 1 million species will go extinct in the next 20 years. The World Wildlife Federation already estimates that wildlife populations across the globe have on average lost 70% of their numbers. And again, due in large part to chemical use and habitat loss. So now even species that used to be common need our help. So as a kid, monarch butterflies, fireflies, and bumblebees were a dime a dozen. Monarch butterflies are now listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is assessing that up to 90% of bumblebee species can also be listed. Fireflies apparently there aren't any good counts, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that they are in pretty steep decline as well. Okay, we're through with that, everybody. I'll breathe for a second. Okay.
Only up from here.
Right. So what can we do in our own yards to help? A lot. Let's look at some nature-inspired landscapes offering a range of ideas. So I want to start with these two images of nature-inspired gardens because they're emblematic of habitat-rich spaces in a few ways. We see color and diversity, lots of different kinds of plants. It is possible, by the way, that not all of these plants are native. But you don't have to be perfect. It's okay. So there's a feast for pollinators. The flowering plants are perennials. They're not mostly annuals. The perennials have those deep roots to help them come back year after year, to help support that soil life and find their water. It's also planted really densely with lots of habitat for wildlife to hide and forage. The landscape hosts activity, which isn't always the case in even very carefully designed landscapes. So I see these design spaces as loosely ordered or pleasingly informal in their design. In the left photo, there's sort of a loose rhythm of plants with different colors and textures and heights. And in the right photo, there's a different technique called massing, also pretty informal with fewer and bigger solid stands of individual species, and that's really nice too. So the next few slides will show some other ideas and techniques for small scale projects to get you started or keep you moving. So it's always good to plant a tree, right? Every Earth Day, plant a tree, tree planting. It's really good to do. We won't go into all the benefits of trees. But fairly recently, scientists have learned that many moths and butterflies who begin their lives in trees need to metamorphose into their adult forms underground. So I think we all have this mental image of sort of building a chrysalis on a plant. Some species do that, but most of them do it in the soil, but they can only do it if the soil is loose and shaded. And so you really need a layer of ground cover plants under those trees. So where we usually see maybe just some mulch or maybe some lawn grass going right up to the trunk, that's not helping the ecology of these insects. And it's really pretty to put ground cover under a tree. So these understory plantings are given the name soft landings by researchers and conservation advocates Heather Holm, Doug Tallamy, and others. And the images you see here are from a webpage by Heather Holm called Soft Landings. And it's a really nice, just a couple pages, but really nice information, graphics, and examples. So here's an example of an island carved out of a lawn. This person delineated the edges of new garden beds, probably by laying out a garden hose, and then added low plants that will fill in and never need mowing. So you would need to water the new plantings in the first season and then any really, really dry stretch after that. And in the beginning, you also would need to discourage weeds until the plants grow to fill the space. But the need to mulch and weed will drop each year, and eventually it becomes pretty self-sustaining. Might not take that long, too many years. So here on the left is a simpler garden island with just one tree, and it looks like 2 plant species in the understory. And then there's a lawn border to the right. And on this, Daria, it looks like your California poppy might be featured here, and some cosmos. So in this region, California poppy is not native, even if it's native to the U.S., is not native to our region. I don't think the cosmos is native to the U.S. at all. But you could recreate this scene pretty closely using natives like Coreopsis and black-eyed Susan. Maybe some milkweed for the pink, even though the bloom period wouldn't be as long as an annual Coreopsis, annual cosmos. But the Coreopsis and the black-eyed Susan have very long bloom periods, which is not always the case with perennials, so that's pretty cool.
No.
Okay, so now on the left, there's a sidewalk and the street and this green strip between them. That green strip is not usually green like that, and it's actually given the name a hell strip because it can be really inhospitable. It can be really hot and dry, and the soil area is confined, so the roots can't really venture outward to seek more moisture. But there are some native plants that grow very, very happily here and make it a much more cheerful thing than it would be otherwise. You would not want to call this a hell strip in this state, I think. And then these plants here would also be intercepting periodic runoff from the sidewalk, or if the yard on the other side of the sidewalk happens to slope, any of that runoff before it reaches the street and the storm drains would get really well intercepted by those plants. And then the bottom right shows what I would call a songbird oasis. It looks like it would attract a lot of insects, which I think a lot of songbirds would like to eat. And then there's the bird bath. And it's just a little pocket. You see a little lawn just behind it. combining plants with stone features can really enhance both the soft green and the hard elements. And if a whole wall is more ambitious than you would want for your project, you can just use stones alone or in groups and get a similar effect synergizing with the plantings. And something else to notice in this slide is that the plants are of different heights. There are perennials and also some woody shrubs in the background. And so adding taller plants among the lower plants adds possibilities for the kinds of spaces you can create. You can, with even taller plants, achieve shading or screening in addition to just having multiple layers of habitat elements and visual interest. This photo, this drawing, is from a booklet that I'm going to have available for folks to thumb through after we're done. It's pretty thick, and it's available free online, so you can take this QR code and find it to look in your own time later if you want. Okay. So landscapes like these are a lot of people's ideals, controlled and neat. And good news, if you do want a landscape like this, even landscapes with big lawns and few or no native plants can support local ecology to some extent when gentle land care practices are used. So this, you can still be a protector of those 3 tiers. And if you use gentle land care practices, you'll be ending a lot of the practices that would harm the life forms that your neighbors are nurturing with pesticides or with nutrient runoff. You can just erase those threats and keep the landscape that you like. And we'll get to details on that in a little bit. We're still kind of on overview mode. So here's a summary of those 3 tiers of commitment for making your yard nature focused. So if you like the yards we saw in this slide, you can still play the role of protector and take steps to help build up landscape health. If you like the slides before that, showing the wild islands or edges, you can be a provider, adding some native plants, making more food and habitat available. And if you want to go all in, we haven't seen a picture of all in yet, I don't think, and make space for as much biodiversity as you can be a nurturer and become really knowledgeable about your local ecology and continue to optimize your space. And you can really pack the plants in. I mean, you can do like tiers and overstories and understories. You can find plants for cracks. You can put plants anywhere if that's what you decide you want to do. Okay, so now some tips and tools that everyone of any tier can use to help their space support more life forms by eliminating sources of harm that you can control. Okay, so watering deep encourages plants to grow deeper roots in the soil. So any lawn you have, these are really good tips to follow. Deeper roots, again, can access more soil moisture between waterings, make them perform just a little bit more like those native plants with the really deep roots. And allowing more growth above ground by mowing high also helps the plant grow more roots below ground. The plant kind of wants to balance its biomass above ground and below ground. And that makes the soil more hospitable to life in the soil and better able to absorb stormwater, prevent runoff, and put less stress on water resources. Okay, next tip. Who's heard of leave the roots? Yeah, I think the word is getting out.
It's so catchy.
Yeah. So plants promote landscape health even when they die and are considered debris. Dry leaves have value in our yard, as do dry hollow stems. Leaves and stems provide important shelter for small creatures, especially for overwintering insects. This leaving the leaves, though, is not something you should do when they're on your lawn. It can suffocate and kill the grass. and they can blow away and clog up the waterways. So the idea is to leave leaves among shrubs and perennial stems that will trap them so that they can be used as habitat, and then in the warmer weather they'll kind of melt away and decompose. So for lawn and garden, I've made a schedule summarizing recommended seasonal practices just to help keep track of what to do when for healthy landscapes. That's what you see on the left, and I have a stack of those to distribute at the end here. And on the right, that's the cover of something else that we have for folks to look at here. I'll dig it out later. The NOFA Land Care Standards. So NOFA is the Northeast Organic Farming Association, and they kind of pioneered this about 20 years ago, and it's really authoritative, and it's a great resource. So I want to make everybody aware of that. So we're focusing on a lot of lawn care right now because most people have at least some lawn. And among us, we have a lot of lawn. It's America's largest irrigated crop. It takes up 3 times as much space as irrigated corn. And altogether, all of our lawns cover 8 times the area of the state of New Jersey. And we want to reduce or prevent chemical runoff from our lawns because there are a lot of people fertilizing and treating lawns for all sorts of things. So here's one of the most important things. This UMass extension says use this form for routine soil analysis, home, grounds, and gardens. So if you do intend to fertilize, it's a really good idea to pay a lab to analyze your soil. It's not expensive. With a lab at a public university like UMass, it costs about $18 a sample. Don't tell UMass, but I moved here from Connecticut, and I know Connecticut accepts our samples, and they're $12 a sample. So if the budget is an issue, UConn is an option too. Same test, same results. And even just 2 or 3 samples gets you a lot of good information. So the lab, what they give you in response, they don't just give you numbers, they give you easy instructions for collecting, labeling, and mailing the sample, first of all. So they tell you how to do it. And then the results tell you what fertilizer to apply, how much, what time in the growing season, which is in the spring when the plants and their roots are actively growing and they can uptake that fertilizer. And they'll even tell you, you might not need to fertilize at all. So that's great. And using just the right amount means preventing waste, saving money, and protecting waterways from runoff, along with having your healthy lawn. And if you use pesticides in your yard and you worry about protecting your plants, there might be safer alternatives to whatever you're using. And again, NOFA is a great source for information about that. Okay, so now we can look closely at this framework. And the idea is that you choose how much you're willing to change in your yard, and you'll see some actions to consider taking so that your yard can be the way you like it, but more supportive of local water quality and biodiversity. And here, this will go out to all of you too. It's on the back of the seasonal. So let's run through that really quickly now. There's a lot of redundancy here, so I'm not going to read the whole slide. We talked about what you can do as a protector. Rethink chemical applications, test your soil, limit outdoor water use, mow high, water deep. Invasive plants, control them either by removing them or removing their flowers. Because a lot of invasive plants, they're not going to escape your yard unless they produce the fruits that the birds will disperse. So if it's feasible to just cut off those flowers and not let it form the berries, you can keep plants that would be invasive under other circumstances, but they're not going to invade anywhere without their fruits. Let's see. Also, mulching your garden beds. So then if you're a provider, you'll be adding more plants. You'll be having more of those spaces that can hold on to those leaves and stay untidied and provide a lot of habitat. Some of your plants hopefully will be trees. They're really important in our landscapes. There's another handout about keystone species that support the largest number of organisms, and our native trees are top of that list. Some perennials too, but the trees are really important. And you can layer it, so you can have trees and perennials together, not either or. And then remember the soft landing plants beneath the trees. So then if you're a nurturer, you just plant more, and you learn more, and you do more, and you make it more of an obsession. And some of us will do that, and most of us won't, and that's okay, because everybody has something to contribute to this big picture.
Could I add something to this? So
Yeah, please.
one of the suggestions I make to people, because sometimes people look out their yards and they're just totally overwhelmed. There's invasives everywhere. How do I take this on? I just can't do it. One very simple action they can take is you identify one invasive plant in your yard, like a multifloral rose or a honeysuckle or a buckthorn or burning bush, something like that, and you pop it out and you drop a native plant in its place, just a one-for-one swap. And you didn't solve your problem, but you took that one tangible step in the right direction. You can feel good about that.
Yeah, I like that, one for one.
Yeah.
And we'll be recommending that with this handout that Kenna put together, where we have invasive plants and then sort of the one-to-one substitute that might work. Awesome. Is everybody ready to move on to the next? And again, this is a handout you'll all be able to take home and keep. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to talk next about adding plants, more specifically. And when you go to add plants, again, keep in mind that there are a lot of different native habitats with plants adapted to that specific habitat. Not all native plants will be adapted to thrive in the particular spot you want to plant in your yard. So you need to match the plant with your spot. And if you do that, then native plants can thrive without much special care, but this is a really important step. And the Native Plant Trust has prepared a great sheet, which I'm also going to pass out because it's a great resource to help you sort of hone in on the specific attributes of your site that are going to determine which plant is going to do well there.
Could I just add to that?
Sure.
So the Native Plant Trust has a tool on their website called Garden Finder or Native Plant Finder. And what you can do is check in boxes that fit the attributes of your individual yard. So if your yard's sunny, shady, slopey, wet, dry, whatever conditions you want. Or you can check in the boxes for the kind of plants you want. I want tall plants, short plants, edible plants, whatever it is. You check the boxes and then the algorithm will pop up the species that fit the criteria that you put into. So if you need more specific guidance, what's going to work that I want, then that tool will tell you.
I'm going to change this slide so that it shows that,
Okay.
that portal. That's a great
All right.
idea. Thanks for bringing that
Sure.
up. That's terrific. Okay, and I also just wanted to mention too that sometimes just taking like a quick glance isn't enough, that to be really thorough, this is going to sound kind of crazy, but if you want to take a risk on one plant, say, okay, it's a plant that has pretty broad tolerances, it should be fine. But it's a good idea to watch the spot for almost a whole growing season, because an area that's sunny in June might not be sunny in early May or in September, because different times of the year the sun will be higher or lower in the sky, and so a snapshot of conditions won't necessarily show you the whole story. So just just be aware that it's a good idea to really get to know your site well if you're going to be making a big investment. Okay, and sourcing native plants. Unless you're friends with Russ, I figure you should go to one of these places to get your plants. There are other places. I've gotten native plants at Mahoney's, but be careful because they jumbled their sections. And I bought something that I thought was native because I wasn't paying attention to the species. That turned out not to be. But they do have a lot. Native Plant Trust is amazing. If they run Garden in the Woods, which is open to the public for a fee. It's such a beautiful, wonderful place. If anyone who hasn't been there, I highly recommend it, just for the hiking opportunity. Blue stem perennials, they're pretty new. I visited them the first time this summer. They are really great. City Natives in Mattapan, that's run by trustees of reservations. They're not like a commercial nursery. They have a big sale in May. And then Grow Native Massachusetts, also just 2 days, but they also are trying to get a lot of native plants out into the world. And the Wild Seed Project, I think like 1 or 2 days a year they're open. You can go buy plants, but for the most part, you order native seeds by mail order. And they're available like in season in a pretty limited window, and they sell out, so you have to kind of be on top of what you want or be prepared to be flexible. And then the places that are bolded, they have really great websites with lots of resources, photos, lists, charts, databases, and it helps you choose your plants, it helps you imagine possibilities for your space. Really great resources.
I also had my previous crops from Neighborhood Produce. They work with local farms and orchards.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
That's
And they did really well, my veggie crops.
that's so
I
good
was
to know.
surprised, so.
Very cool.
Some are really
All right. Okay. So there are a lot of different ways to add plants in order to become more of a provider or a nurturer. When we talk about design, we're talking about exploring and sorting through lots of options, and it can be kind of overwhelming. So here are 4 starting points that you might find helpful. So you can either start with the plants, just go hunting for plants. And once you find the plant, you figure out, hopefully you have a place in your yard where it can be happy. You figure out your conditions, you match it, put that plant where those conditions match best what it needs, and you multiply that for more plants, and that becomes your design. Or you can start with a spot. Say, this is the spot, this is going to be my garden, I need plants that will be happy here. So you really have to analyze, okay, what plants are going to work here? What do I like? Where can I find them? Can I find them at all? Do I need to switch to some different plants that I can find? Or you can find inspiration from a place you've seen either in person or a place you've seen just in photos. And you can say, well, how can I create the feeling I'm getting from this place that I care about? And then the last starting point is sort of a use-based starting point. Like, do I want to use my space in a different way than I'm using it now? And how do I need to reconfigure it? And how do the plants fit into that? And have that be your starting point. So then, Mark Richardson, I don't know if he was the horticulturist, a horticulturist at Native Plant Trust. I don't know if he's still there, but I came upon this really nice method for looking at your lawn and figuring out how you might reduce it. So he urges you to separate it into 3 different zones. So one zone is, where do I not want lawn at all? Where do I not need it to be low? Where can it just be covered with something substantial and be the very opposite of lawn? And he said, call this the garden zone. And those would be your taller plants. Then there might be some places where you kind of want the sight line, you want the openness. It doesn't have to be lawn. Maybe you're not ever going to walk on it or play on it or lie on it. It can be green ground cover instead of lawn and not have to mow that area. And then finally you're left with, this is the lawn that I need. It's either an area where I want to picnic or play, or maybe it's a strip, that's the path I want to walk. And so that can be the part that stays lawn. And again, you can learn maybe some practices that are more eco-friendly if there's some room to grow in that direction. And so here's another way to evaluate site conditions, and this isn't just focusing on the plant, this is also looking at the configuration of the site with buildings and infrastructure, also looking at things like water flow and erosion, whether there are places that water might pool or might be eroding a path. And those are some signals for things that your new design might want to address. And we're gonna pass this out too. Okay. Next, resources. So there is this I don't know if this sounds like I've mentioned a lot of things that might make it sound like making a garden is going to be a really big, scary job, which hopefully is not what happened. But there's so much great help and information to help walk you through it and support your efforts. There are free digital booklets. And I have samples of all of these that I'll put on the table for you to look through with QR codes to be able to find them yourselves if you want. So these books have design templates and also coaching on process and techniques. So these would be for the providers and nurturers among you who want to add plants. These books are helpful for managing and enhancing spaces for wildlife. These books are really good if you want to be better nurturers, to fine-tune your designs, to optimize habitat, maybe for very specific critters. And there are a lot of really helpful organizations, some of which are local, like the Massachusetts Pollinator Network, Tufts Pollinator Initiative, Blue Stem Natives. There's so much good stuff. And really everything you need if you want to do a project yourself and you have interest and time. But because a lot of you might not have a huge amount of time, we have made a digest. So Kenna and I have worked to summarize some of the key content in a lot of these sources, make it easier to gather the information you need to maintain and improve your home habitat. It's not online yet, but it should be in the next week or so. And there are links to these sources of more detailed information if you want, but there is a lot of really kind of basic step-by-step, trust us, this will help kind of stuff. There are also a lot of consultants who are available if you have a complicated redesign that you want to do. NOFA maintains a database of they certify people who are trained in organic land care and ecological design. The Ecological Landscape Alliance also has a member directory, and American Society of Landscape Architects. They have sort of a broad universe of designers who do all kinds of different things. One section of their members focus on sustainability, but you can find those folks using their tool called Firm Finder with a filter for sustainability. Oh, sorry, I want to say one more thing back there. So a consultant can give you advice and coaching. They can also give you faster results. They can maybe give you a more polished appearance. They can help you put together an integrated long-term plan. This is all for really ambitious stuff. But take an ambitious project and make it manageable or feasible. But I did want to say though, if you do it yourself slowly over time, you may end up being happier, assuming you have the time and the patience, because you are there much more than a consultant would ever be there. And you'll be observing and responding in a way that a consultant it's not part of their service. And you'll be able to really have like a dialogue with your site and come up with a plan that's of a much finer grain than somebody who doesn't know your site as well as you do, if you can train yourself to observe. So again, these big projects might seem overwhelming, but they can be phased in over time. Just one example. And if you hired a designer, they'd produce drawings like this to help you explore options, visualize alternatives, maybe summarize the site conditions. But again, if you have the time and patience for your own research and experimentation and discovery, you can expect a very rewarding personal journey, deepening and strengthening your connection to your yard and to the world around you. So however you want your yard to look, there are lots of things you can do to support life around you, whether you choose to be a protector, provider, or nurturer. Your changes might not be visible to others. They will all make a difference, moving us toward a richer, healthier world.